Welcome to The Vinyl Guide, the podcast for record collectors and music nerds. Here's your host, the biggest record nerd of them all, Nate Goyer.
Oh, well, hey everyone, it's Nate. Welcome to episode 517 of The Vinyl Guide, the podcast for record collectors and music nerds. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm recording this in Austin, Texas. You may hear the heat in your headphones there. It's actually quite a beautiful day, and I've been traveling quite a bit through California, Las Vegas, now Austin, and pretty soon I'll be kind of winding my way back home. So I appreciate everyone's patience and nice messages with all the texts and pictures and connections that I've been making throughout the trip. Again, really do appreciate everyone and their eagerness to connect and talk records. This week, got a very special one here. We are talking with Dave Gardner and Catherine Vericolli. Dave is a mastering engineer and Catherine is an audio archivist. And together, they are working with Org Music and others to preserve the Westbound Records music catalog. It's a very compelling story they tell. Today, we talk all about that preservation. What were the condition of the tapes? How did they determine which masters to use? The double 45 RPM version of Funkadelic. What's happening with Maggot Brain and Free Your Mind? Are they finding any unreleased recordings? We talk about our shared love of Dennis Coffey and so much more. And by the way, you could pick up a few of those Westbound titles already. The Funkadelic single and double 45 RPM LPs are in store racks now. So go bug your record guy to grab one of those. You could also check out the Counts LP, What's Up Front That Counts. That's available. That's a killer one. Oh my gosh, don't pass that one up. There's a bunch of killer stuff. By the way, you could also order all that direct from the website, orgmusic.com. Oh, and by the way, there's a super extended version of this conversation, nearly another hour, only available at patreon.com/vinylguide. Supporters of the podcast get the full conversation, the full extended version, almost 2 hours, and it's in high resolution. So head over there now, patreon.com/vinylguide, and your support is certainly appreciated. And with that, let's get into our conversation with Dave and Catherine about preserving the Westbound sound. This week on the show, we are welcoming Dave Gardner and Catherine Vericolli, who are working hard at helping make sure that we get to hear the catalog of Westbound Records in as high a clarity and fidelity as we can. Welcome to the show, Dave and Catherine. Now, just so I'm clear, I don't want to make assumptions here. What are each of your roles in this? And for example, Dave, you're mastering engineer. Can you quickly describe what it is you do?
Like just a general overview on mastering?
Yes.
Yeah. So the way that I approach mastering, and I think some people may do it a little bit differently, but I look at mastering as the link between the creative process and the manufacturing process. It's sort of that last step that takes the specific parameters and standards of whatever the format the material is going to be released in, and then tries to coalesce and bloom that material in a way that best fits that format.
Now, Catherine, your role is an archivist. Can you
Correct.
take us through kind of what that means? What's your day-to-day there?
Well, oh man, it's different every day. So basically, my job is to take the medium wherever that music exists. Most of the time, that's going to be open reel analog tape. Could be multi-track tape, could be quarter-inch masters, could be half-inch masters, could be a cassette tape, etc. And bringing that into the digital realm at the truest and purest, highest quality form that I can. So that includes a lot of physical restoration as well, a lot of remediation. So there's a lot of mold remediation, a lot of splice remediation. And then to be honest, most of my job is sort of like audio sleuthing, like audio kind of archaeology. You know, we don't always get information when the tapes come in. We don't have track sheets. We might not have anything on the box. We might not have the correct or any test tones to work from. So a lot of it is sort of working backwards with clues to try to figure out, okay, this is how this was printed, like at what level it was printed at, what they were doing, how many drugs they might have been doing, what kind of drugs they were doing, things like that. So try to figure out
what the material the magnetic tape is super important.
Right.
Yeah, basically my job is to try and not be really, really stressed out moving a tape of which there is only one of. Concentrate on fundamentals and, try to figure out how that was printed and how I can play that tape back, in the truest way to that. And, that comes with a lot of consideration and then also what are we doing with it? Are we just keeping it for posterity? Are we dealing with, are we reissuing it? Is it going to be cut on vinyl? And all of those things, will change the decisions that I make when I'm doing that work. So, but yeah, I mean, I a lot of the stuff I really love to do is the stuff like I do with Dave a lot, the like catalogs, reissue stuff, vinyl stuff, but I do a lot of academia. I do a lot of, it's kind of all over the map. So a lot of asset management, et cetera.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating. It is a bit of archaeology. There's not always the breadcrumb trail or the information. You have to kind of piece it together.
No, it's wild. And I think that's, Catherine and I have known each other and worked together a little bit. And then really, and Catherine has restored and transferred stuff for me that stuff that I worked on for Sun Records and some other stuff. And then, and we can get into how this whole Westbound thing sort of started. I think there's been an assumption that Catherine and I talk about that, and we can go into detail on how it really got blown out of the water while we're working on this Westbound stuff, was there's this general assumption kind of in pro audio, and I feel like to a degree with record collecting and people who are focused on audio collections, that looks back on the past and makes an assumption that things were being done the right way. And what I have come to understand is that they weren't, that it's always been a shit show, and that people doing really creative things often were not the projects where there was the capital to support them. And, I've seen that from unbelievable stuff. And you're left with really some significant archaeology, and that is how so many reissues come out, and they're fundamentally wrong versions, and then it's like, okay, so what is right? Yeah. And so we,
there's a lot that goes into it. There's not, as much as you'd like to think, okay, there's a proper way for things to be done. Most of the records that we love, probably more than others, were not done, quote, air quotes, properly. They weren't necessarily tracked well. They were printed weird. They were copied a bunch of times. The master tapes got lost. This happened, that happened, and then circle back to 50 years later, and you've got an archivist and a mastering engineer looking at a collection like Westbound. We were very lucky. We got to go down there. We got to, look at the collection in its entirety, figure out patterns, figure out, okay, these tapes went here at this time, these tapes came back. And as, we worked through it, it's so cool that Dave and I get to do these things at the same time. I can't stress enough that being an archivist, and most of the work that archivists do are in rooms by themselves. And they're sending things out to mastering engineers to get done. In this particular situation, the thing that Dave and I have sort of accidentally created is this amazing way to approach an archive and approach assets in a way that best serves the entire collection and best serves how it's going to be released.
So let's just jump into it real quick.
Yeah.
I think we could go very deep into all these areas.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like 5 hours.
Yeah. So a brief history of Westbound Records for, again, just kind of level set for listeners who may not be as familiar with Westbound Records. Can you summarize and give a quick history for those who need to know?
Sure, and this is my understanding, which is probably not fully accurate. It's going to be kind of piecemeal. But Westbound was a record label that was initially started. I can't remember Armin's last name.
I don't. I can't remember his last name right
but
now.
he was
Armin Boladian? Boladian?
Bulganian, maybe.
Yeah.
So,
So my understanding is that he had a record distribution company, and he, in the late 1960s, I want to say 68 or 69, decided, like I think a lot of those distributors were deciding at that period when people, the birth of the LP and people really started to make a lot of money selling records. I think he decided to start a record label, and they naturally started with Detroit artists. There was a connection there. The original distributor was Janus. I didn't even know they were a record distributor. I knew them as a British film company. So then they have some hits, and then, they go pretty strong. I think that it was sort of a regional independent label. They had a lot of success with Ohio Players, and, there's a couple great Denise LaSalle records. There's all of the sort of like
Detroit Emeralds.
There's like the Funkadelic related projects. Funkadelic, obviously Funkadelic did really well, and then at some point
and got into a little bit more of the disco and sort of like R&B beat in the 80s with Aramis and Dennis Coffey.
Yeah.
So it kind of like, it's like a funk R&B sort of adjacent, all Detroit.
Yep.
Not all of it was tracked in Detroit. Some of it was in Memphis, but for the most part, it was,
very Michigan, Ohio, like a very
post Motown, just like, just a sort of I don't know that it started off as being something that was. It was kind of just a weird experiment, and then Funkadelic happened.
Yeah,
and it was like, it was like, okay, here's
Funkadelic is definitely part of that weird experiment. Yeah,
well, right. But like, here's a totally different way to listen to this kind of music. Like this is so different, They were
the kind of this bridge between '60s soul and the funk explosion of the '70s. So the catalog is incredibly, is very legendary. The labels maintained. Active is probably not the right word, but the principles are still around, yeah?
Yeah. In 1980, 1981, I think Armin sort of decided to take a break, but he still owns the assets. And, Ace in the UK had the license for a long time. And then when that agreement came to an end, they decided to see if they could do something themselves. They got in touch, not sure how it happened, but most of the people who were interested in the catalog were really interested in sort of like picking and choosing, like basically they just wanted to kind of grab the sort of like those 12 to 25 records and then leave everything else out. And I think one of the things that is really wonderful about Andrew from Org Music is that he was like, no, I mean, it's the whole thing. This is like an ecosystem. You can't, this is it. You guys have held on to this. We're not going to all of a sudden like cherry pick.
So the Westbound library, we'll call it, it was relatively complete. It sounds like they've kept more than maybe a lot of other.
Yes and no. So it's complete in a way because assets, they don't stay in the same building forever. I mean, maybe sometimes, it's rare. So most of this stuff went to the UK. Before that, it went to Memphis to get copied. That's a whole nother shit show.
Then it went to Toronto.
And when everything came back, not everything came back. So great example is the first Funkadelic record, Funkadelic, which comes out tomorrow.
Yeah.
We had one original master tape of the B-side.
The mixes.
Mixes.
It was a pre-manufactured copy.
And then we had, I think we had we had a
safety dub.
Safety dub.
So we had first generation, which is pretty great.
It's still, I mean, God, that's
amazing.
like, if you can get even second, you're doing well. So we've got, so it's kind of like a piecemeal. Like we looked at, there was a specific Ohio Players record that they wanted to reissue. We didn't have the complete masters for it. So we had a complete masters for another record. So is it complete? It's pretty complete.
You were able to find them, and I think I think the thing that too that maybe people don't necessarily understand, and I don't know, maybe they do, maybe they don't, but the process of how records were made and distributed in the 1970s, because it was all physical, you would have the mixes done. There would be an assembled or sometimes not assembled like mix reel. Then you would immediately start making copies of that. And sometimes those copies are perfect, and a lot of times they're not perfect. And then you start getting copies of copies. And then
you get Dolby copies for tape, for cassette tape release. You have, so there could be, for some of these releases on Westbound, we had a stack of tapes all for one record.
Yeah.
And we need to go, the process, which we didn't have nearly enough time to do, but there's never enough time. So you got to go through all that, and you have to recognize the patterns really quickly and make decisions how to approach that where you're going to get the best result. So, we don't always have the ingredients that we want, but we've got enough to sort of track back. And because Dave and I can do that together in the same room, and I know where it's going,
right?
And I know his workflow, etc. It was kind of a perfect storm in a way for the Westbound catalog.
And it was very complete. I mean, the one record that there was great concern about was I have been under the impression for a very long time that the Maggot Brain masters have been missing, which would make total sense, right? Like if something's not going to come back, it's going to be Maggot Brain, right? Like that's something that that's something that is magically not going to be delivered.
And we assumed that. And we went through everything to find them.
But I was really determined, because what we had a later generation production copy that didn't sound great. It had been EQ'd, and it just didn't sound great. And so, we would have these moments where we had Nick King, who's the engineer at 54 Sound, which is the facility that we were doing all the sorting where the archive was.
Thank God for him.
He's an unbelievable dude, like a fantastic dude. But it would be the kind of thing where I would have, and what was kind of amazing. So the console that's in the studio we were working in is Barry Gordy's custom Neve, which is pretty amazing. And we're basically using it as like a sorting table on the monitor. And so we would just make these stacks of all of the Funkadelic records and Funkadelic tapes, and we found like weird singles and like some very strange stuff.
Some radio,
like stuff,
promotion
there's
stuff.
so much
mono. It was just like
so much cool stuff. And I'm sure it's all going to see the light of day sometime. I'm just not sure when. It's like, because we're kind of working through this and so we would just get these stacks, and I would just sit and go through it. And while we're working on this, then Catherine would come in, and it's like, okay, what are we looking for? And we'd establish what the time period was. We could figure it out. And then Catherine, because she could encyclopedically, it's like, okay, this is what 3M tape boxes in between 1971 and 74 look like.
With Maggot Brain, we knew what we were looking for box-wise, but it wasn't anywhere. And then there was a couple of white archive boxes.
Yeah, just unmarked boxes.
Nothing. And we were like, so then we got to the point where we're like, okay, now we got to start checking shit that like doesn't have any information on it, just in case. And fuck us if we didn't find Maggot Brain Masters. I was like in white pancake tapes in white boxes.
Like, and it was a white,
very smugly. Somebody smuggled.
Yeah, it was a white box, and I just happened to I was like lifting the lid and just kind of looking at it. And sometimes when stuff isn't labeled at all, you would get grease pen. And so I had written in front of me on a pad while I was looking through all the tapes was all the early catalog numbers. And sure enough, I opened this unmarked box that those guys had found that was, among other stuff from around that time period. And I just kind of like tilted it, and then I saw the original catalog number for Maggot Brain.
And then on the side. When you're transferring it, you're like, sounds right.
Yep.
Sounds like it's right.
Yeah.
Working through this archive, deciding where, Andrew's making such awesome, amazing decisions about how to put this out and the right way to do it, and doing double 45, cuts of these, and all analog stuff. The work does not end when you're archiving. Like when we're mastering, we're matching, we're trying to figure out if this is the right speed, and we'll spend days making sure that our tape copies that we made for these analog releases that came from those unmarked original masters are in fact the right speed. which release are we picking? Are we picking, there's 6 different releases, Free Your Mind had 6 different releases, all of them a little bit at different speeds. Sometimes the LR is flipped. We're just like, we have to establish like, okay, what are we trying to land on here, and then really make sure that we're
before we even think about how it sounds, like before I even think about what I'm going to do EQ wise, before I'm even thinking about any of that, when you press play on a tape machine, except for the very, very last generation of tape machines, the very last generation, the ATR 102, the very last generations of the Studers, the 820s, is that the playback speed is not linear. It changes depending on the tension on the motors, and different machines reacted differently. And not only that, but you had a lot of artists and you had a lot of creative decisions made at cutting or at mixing, etc., where they changed the speed on the tape, either speeding up or slowing it down to
like
kind of like
fit the side, make sure, like speed it up a little bit to cut it.
Like Sly Stone, famously, supposedly, all of his masters are slightly sped up. So you get in this situation, and then it's almost never that a master tape, when you pull it up, matches the speed of a release or any of the releases.
So at that point, how do you make the decision? So, for example, if here's
what you do. You the first thing you have to do is give a lot of shit. You have to care.
Yeah.
You have to care a lot. And then you have to kind of freak out a little bit, and hopefully you have somebody to bounce. Dave and I keep each other from going down rabbit holes, because there's so many different consumers. So we've got hi-fi consumers who are purists. We've got people who are going to buy this for the first time. We've got, we have the original people who are still alive who are going to have to approve this, and it goes on and on and on. So we spend time.
You don't have the same, So what we did, for example, on Maggot, like a couple, 2 months ago? About 2 months ago, Catherine came out, and we were lucky with Funkadelic. It was really close.
And there wasn't a lot there was like, okay, this is the release of this.
It was, and so and the other important thing to note, and this is something that Catherine and I feel, I think, similarly strongly about, but we are not. I don't even know if we're in the majority or if it even really matters. But so because of my background academically, I'm extremely uncomfortable working. If I'm working from tape, say I'm cutting all analog or I'm mastering, I'm extremely uncomfortable working on original masters.
Most of the time you can't.
Because my feeling is that the potential for me to damage an absolutely priceless, irreplaceable cultural, really, if we look at it, it's basically an antiquity, right?
Well, you can't get it. It
nobody's
doesn't exist. Nobody's going to allow those masters out of the building.
Nobody's taking the Constitution and being like, oh, I'm going to take the Constitution and just lay tracing paper over it, and it's like, and to me, I feel like there's a sense with audio that's that perspective has been lost. So it's incredibly complicated, and you have to get people on board. And we were lucky with Joel, who's overseeing the project for Westbound, and Org, that they basically let us, Catherine and I, pick this stuff, and this is not everything.
You have to establish
right now.
Trust.
We're just doing this. We're doing this we did it with the Funkadelic catalog, and so what we did was they had a specific Ampex tape machine in Detroit. Catherine and I both work with Rupert Neve Designs gear. I use, both the analog digital converters and this specific digital analog converter that they make, ironically, for the hi-fi market, because it's basically, it's a preamp, so it allows us to have monitor control. So we had completely duplicate setups, both digitally and analog. I flew into Nashville. We drove Catherine's transfer machine, her customized Ampex machine, up to Detroit in the back of her Subaru. We loaded it out in the middle of the winter, and we had a completely we did 1-to-1 copies exactly from the original master, which we were making a digital safety copy as we were printing an analog copy, and then I was capturing that analog copy. So at the end of our time in Detroit, we had 1-to-1 analog copies of every Funkadelic record. We also had a high-resolution digital capture of the original tape and a high-resolution digital capture of the copy tape. So I could then come back to LA and I could pull into my system and I could pull like 4 sources in and match them. I could match, okay, here's the capture of the original digital, here's the capture of the digital coming off that machine, and then I can play back the 1-to-1 copy, and I can make sure that everything matches.
Well, and then also we're taking the releases, like, okay, Free Your Mind is a good example. We're taking a bunch of different releases of that, putting them up on the lathe, which is locked, of course, 33 1/3, playing them, capturing them, and then taking what we know to be the master or closest to what we have in the master from all of that process in Detroit, knowing that's what we're going to have to do,
right,
setting it up that way. And then going, okay, let's compare this to all these releases and then narrow it down to one that is clearly the closest to what is true. That's how you make the decision. And then hopefully everybody's on board.
Let me just say, because you used the word true, and that phrase true could be different for
well, not necessarily true, because who knows what's true? I mean, what's pressed and printed is probably not true to how it was tracked to begin with, and we fucking found that out on a couple of releases too. But,
and so the way that I guess I would define it is
it's got to be in the consumer world. Like what's the most consumed, most appreciated, most loved version of this release, and how can we?
And this is where I think I may slightly differ from you at the start point. Okay. It's not differ, but so the way that I start that process is I start by having a very first pressing, and then I make sure that but sometimes you have to be careful, because sometimes they would rush pressings out, and that first pressing may actually be problematic. And so you have to have then, say, a second pressing, or in the case of a lot of the Westbound stuff, there was a distributor change, I think, in 74, and all the tapes get moved from either Memphis or Nashville up to Toronto. And so the most sold copies, the most sort of consumed copies, tend to be that second batch, the sort of Toronto batch. And so it was important to have a copy of that, and it was important to have a first-generation copy. And then I had some EU copies. And then I had my reissue that I'd owned since 1989. And then, everything trying to match against the original catalog number or the catalog number that was on the tape that we had. Because the catalog numbers were a little weird at the beginning of the Westbound stuff. So then that's what we're using as sort of our North Star. And again, I'm not even talking about EQ or processing. We're just talking about pitch, and we're talking about time. And that's because you can't make those assumptions. And one of the first things we found out the first day that we were in Detroit is that, and I've listened to the Funkadelic catalog, God, I want to say that, like, I mean, probably since I was 10 years old. There's like there's a George Clinton solo record that came out that I remember that got me super into, and I liked Parliament, and then I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so I've listened to Maggot Brain for the majority of my life. And as soon as I listened to the master tape, I was like, I don't know, maybe this isn't the right master tape. So then we pull up the streaming version, and it sounds completely different. Completely different. And then I was just like, wait a minute, what's going on? And at that point, that really started this whole process that we went down, where it was like, before I can even start working, we've got to make sure that we have the most original version, and we're matching it to the preferred and most original LP.
Is there a difference between the approach of the double 45 RPM and the single 33? Like, for instance, for audiophiles, is there a different kind of master approach?
On the first LP, this is really important. And I think because initially there was, and on one of the forums, a client of both Catherine and I's was like, hey, have you guys seen this? And it was sort of speculation that the double 45 was done as a way to like sort of cash in, et cetera, et cetera. What's important to know about the first Funkadelic record is that, one of the sides is almost 27 minutes long. So the LP as a format is really ideally at 33 RPM. To get a really great cut with pretty linear playback response, you want to max out around 17 minutes. 17 to 22 minutes, you can keep it pretty linear. It's going to get quiet. 22 to 24 minutes, you're going to start having to make like real significant compromises to the way the record sounds to fit it on there. But again, it's a commercial object, right? Someone's buying it. It's the equivalent, especially in 1970, it's the equivalent of like a magazine or a book or however it's going to be. So that side is 27 minutes long. So in order for them to fit that side onto a 33 RPM, the compromises that were made at mastering were unbelievably significant. And the way that they sort of save space on a record is that you like put material into mono, right? So it allows you to conserve space on the record. So usually what's done is that you want your out of phase material to, I try to not, as much as possible, keep the stereo field when I cut. I try and keep the stereo field as true to the original as possible. I mean, you've got, sometimes you have to do a little bit of summing, but I try not to sum above like sub bass, right? Because that's largely going to be heard omnidirectionally anyway. And for me, I think there's all kinds of interesting stuff that happens in the stereo field when it's not summed. So, I would say like, I'm comfortable subbing up to like, if a kick drum's sort of resonant frequency is somewhere between like 50 and 70 hertz, right? And bass is somewhere between like 50 and 200. So I don't like to, I personally don't like to sum if I don't have to. On that first Maggot Brain record, it's summed to on Funkadelic, it's summed way up above 1,000 hertz. So the first time I listened to the tape, I was like, what is going on? And there's an incredible amount of stuff that you can hear them starting to do, experimenting with working in the stereo field that I'd never heard before because
it was lost on the 27-minute side.
It was lost on the 27-minute side.
It's too long. I mean, for it to be heard the way it's supposed to be heard, it needs to be a double 45.
Right.
It needs to be,
or at least with the old way that you cut, right? Yeah. The old way, if you cut, like if you were cutting in 1971 with what you had as a pitch computer, right? You have two stereo paths if you're cutting stereo audio in vinyl. The audio goes into a computer that controls the actual cutting itself, the actual work of the lathe, like how deep the groove is, how they're spaced, et cetera, et cetera. The other one goes straight into the cutting electronics and then is, etched into the lacquer itself. And at that point, you had to make unbelievable sonic compromises to make a record of that length fit. Now, with modern digital pitch computers and with modern digital signal processing, because you can basically make time stand still in the digital realm, you can cut a pretty good sounding 27-minute side. I think that the 33 RPM, 27-minute side, I cut it on the, I decided to cut a little quieter to try and keep as much of that stereo information as possible, but there has to be a compromise. Like with a side that long, you have to make a compromise. So with the double 45, that's all analog, and I don't have to make a compromise. And not only that, but 45 RPM records have a more linear playback. So it sounds as close to the tape as possible.
Are the other Funkadelics, Free Your Mind, Maggot Brain, are those also being considered for double 45s?
They will. There's so there'll be double 45 versions, and I think where we can, and so far, we haven't, we're working our way through the catalog, but so far the first record has really been the only one where we've been forced to do both the 33 and the 45, from a high resolution digital file. We're going to, the goal for this stuff is to cut as much as we can where it doesn't force a compromise to the material. Both the 33 and the 45s will be cut all analog. So I'll cut from our modified ATR 102, which has a preview head and built into it, and all the EQ, all the processing will be all analog. It will not go through any digital conversion in the audio path at all.
Right. Now, how are you treating extra tracks? Like, it sounds like in the tapes you're probably finding some unreleased stuff. How's that being managed?
I think that decision's still being made. I know that there's a lot. I think there's going to probably be, I would assume there's going to be like kind of a B-sides and rarities collection. There'll be some other releases. I don't really know. That's kind of beyond a little bit of, that's outside of our purview. That's above our pay.
Yeah, it's definitely not decisions we're making.
Yeah.
I mean, there are things that have been transferred. And to be honest, a lot of that material that is quote unreleased for like the really big, like Funkadelic, etc., the really big stuff, a lot of that is not in a stereo format.
Yeah.
Most of that is in a multi-track format, which we're not moving any multi-tracks. That doesn't mean we won't, or doesn't mean they won't. So that's kind of like a tomorrow question, or it's kind of like a 2 years from now maybe question.
Because remember, when the first records are being made, they're being made on really tight budgets. So anything that would have been extra would have been left unmixed.
So it's probably not even mixed.
So
it's probably just on a multi-track format.
But for example, America Eats Its Young, when I was sorting through those tapes, I found a lot of alternate versions. And so when we get to that, that'll be interesting. I don't know if they'll do something. I don't know what they'll do with those. But there's
unknown.
For our part, we are looking. Our whole process with this is to look at what the original release was that came out, keep it in context with the releases that maybe people knew the best if they're a little bit different, and then make every step of the decision incredibly intentional to allow people to hear this stuff.
I see this as very similar to, I guess, what they've done with like Beatles or Pink Floyd. They're kind of making the forever versions because with Westbound, I know I've got got some of the early stuff. Fortunate enough to have bought some of those records before the prices fucking skyrocketed. But there's a bunch of reissues throughout the 80s and 90s, and a bunch of ones that are coming out of Europe that kind of make me raise my eyebrow. These are ones that I'm like, okay, this is going to be kind of my lifelong version that I'll take for the rest of my days. But people 20 years from now will likely be using the versions that you're doing now.
That's we hope for longevity, and like if you can sort of tick as many boxes as you can. And again, it's a very esoteric thing. Reissues are so much more complex than people might think they are. There's so many decisions that have to go in. I mean, things that we don't even have a hand in, artwork, etc. That you try to land as close as you can to something that's going to be the next generation. Essentially, we're deciding this is what this record sounds like for the next generation. It's super important.
And like, for example, when Catherine was out here in June, we spent the better part of a week off the clock because we're both that's who we are.
I think we might just be creating.
Right, but we spent a week incrementally. So we have like a custom upgraded Varispeed. So it's basically like, think of it as like a knob that controls the speed of the tape machine, and that allows you to dial it in. So it's like we spent a week trying to decide what the best and closest we could come to a way that worked, right? Because if it has to some degree to be an average, and some of the tapes stretched out. So of the originals. But it literally took us a 40-hour work week to get. I mean, and albeit we took it really far.
Well, these are things that a lot of people, and I don't want to make an assumption, but I'm going to say the average person might not even hear or notice.
But
we can make it as perfect as possible, so we might as well do it.
And what's interesting about this is, so like after we've been that week, Catherine goes back to Nashville, and I happen to stop by a friend's studio, and there's a guy who's an ethnomusicologist who teaches at the University of Buffalo, New York, and lives in my hometown of Pittsburgh, PA. And that's why my friend is like, oh, you should come by and meet my buddy Coulter, who's here producing a record. He'd spent a lot of time in West Africa, particularly in Ghana, and he was producing a Ghanaian musician there. And he was like, oh, Steve tells me you're working on the Funkadelic stuff. And he's like, I had a question for you. What key is, I'm trying to remember what song it is on Maggot Brain. Yeah. He's like, what key is that in? I was like, why? And he's like, well, because with my academic background, I believe that the version, I played that song a ton, and he's like, on the version that's out, it's an E flat. And there's nothing about my understanding of the sort of like the history of what would have come to this being that makes me think that shouldn't be an E. And so I happen to have the refs, the master refs that we just sent out. I played it on my phone. He picked up a guitar and I was like, is that? And he's like, yep, that's an E.
So I mean, it's a tiny little, but I mean, that's
right?
a half step. So
I mean, that's not insignificant. And I would say that I was stunned to go back to my 89 reissue copies, which I was under the impression were like the best reissues, right? Those were the ones right at the end of, they had the Westbound labels on them. I remember literally the day that this record store, Orphoca Joke Opus in Minneapolis, where I was living, got them in. I remember me and a friend of mine drove over on a Friday and bought them. And I have been listening to that because I didn't have an original copy because I was like, oh, this is a perfect. And I pull it up against the Masters, and I'm just like flummoxed. I can't believe that that's what I thought these records were. And then some of those European reissues that you're talking about are so bad, I don't know if I have words to describe how frustrated I am by their presence.
They're pretty bad.
And I think what's tough right now,
I mean, a lot of that's like digital metal. Like those don't matter.
The assets weren't being used. And what's really tough about it is that I think as news of this campaign has come out, they're pushing those onto the market right now, hoping that folks are like, oh, this is the new reissue of this. And that, I'm frustrated by that. We've been hearing about that from some folks because it's just, I don't.
It's tough.
It's
tough.
Just they're not accurate.
Yeah.
They're not accurate reissues, and I'm not even talking about how they sound. I'm just saying they fundamentally are inaccurate.
Yeah. So yeah, the only thing we can do is just, the word properly is again subjective, but like the only thing we can do is put out something as that's done as well as absolutely possible, and just take as much time as we can to really consider all of these things that could affect the longevity of especially this campaign, but really of any reissue.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up, Dave. The speed, because just a bit earlier we were talking about what is correct, what is true, and is it true what's on the master tape? Is it true what's on all the pressings that everyone's ears have been used to over the decades? But it sounds in this particular instance, we need to go back to exactly what the master says, because even if
you have to consider all of that. You have to consider all of it.
Yeah,
there's not like one source that is like that where you could say this is nothing is true. Right. It's just like what is the best service? What is the best way to in service to the record?
It's all the context, because the master tape will not be, if you just threw the master tape up, if we just threw the master tape up, it'd be at the wrong speed.
It's going to be at the wrong speed.
Because we're playing it on a modified ATR 104 that does not have speed variation or measurable speed variation.
Right.
That machine started out on an Ampex 351, a machine that sounds wonderful. It is the sound of so many great American recordings. Like it was in everywhere, but not a great tape transport.
Well,
and then the AG440Bs, which were the most common tape machines in American facilities in the 1970s, were notoriously bad for their speed. So you just...
Well, you could say, what's the most true version of a person? I mean, are they truest right when they're born? Or are they true right now? Are they true right before they die?
Are they true to themselves, or are they true to their perspective for others? Yeah.
Some instances, you could argue, right? One could argue what is the truest thing is like what happened in the room when it was tracked. Okay, cool. In order to get to that, we need the exact tape machine. We need the exact, noise reduction units. We need the exact gear. We need the exact temper. We need so much exact shit. We're never going to get back to that. That would be arguably, air quotes, true. But it
might not be the best.
Well, that's the thing. A, it's an impossibility. And B, it might not be the best. So what is the best? that's the $1 million question, and that's the biggest hurdle in what Dave and I do.
So Funkadelic is out now, and I'm very keen to get my hands on one of those. Okay, Free Your Mind and Maggot Brain. If we ask Santa for one, will he deliver it this year?
Yes, but we don't know. We don't know the dates.
We don't know the dates yet.
It is coming. They are both in line to come, and in the versions that we now know they're going to come out in. We just are not sure exactly when.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it.
And I think, and in the process is going to speed up after this, because there was so much that it took for us to figure out, to make sure that these records were coming out the way. There was just the technical process.
Well, the system had to be put in place.
Yeah, we had, like, Catherine and I basically had to design a system and an approach on how to do this. And we now have that. And so now it's going to be like, okay, now things are going to start. So the timeline, it's not going to be, everything's going to start rolling pretty fast. When that exactly is,
no idea.
Is up again above our pay grade.
Not decisions.
But they're on the way, and in the not too distant future, I don't know when that not too.
You guys had to get everything together. It's almost like you discovered a civilization. You had to figure out their alphabet, and now you can read it.
It is so true. Exactly. As an ancient history nut, personally, if I have time to read weird shit or get into weird shit, it's very similar to the discoveries that are made where it changes. Like, oh, this is what these people ate.
Yeah.
And this is what the songs they sang. Okay, cool. Now it's like, oh, we have a new bone. We've discovered a new piece of pottery. And it now has changed the trajectory of how we understand. It's the same thing in audio. We've discovered a pattern. It's changed the trajectory of how this label handled things, or how these records were made, how they were released, how they were cut. It's cool.
In going through these tapes, did you find anything, for example, especially in the later years, unreleased album? Like, for example, there was a CJ & Co.'s rumored third LP that was never released. Is that amongst the tapes?
We are still it's been in, it's kind of, this is in waves. And sort of there was a first wave where I went out and did the initial assessment. Then I went back, and
we also did not have enough time
to
go through every single thing. So some stuff we were like, oh shit, that might be cool, but we have 40 tapes to transfer in 3 days. Like,
so you don't have the full inventory done yet.
No, we don't have the full inventory. It's been focused, and there was sort of a like non-Funkadelic release dates for sort of the first couple years of the campaign, and then Funkadelic. When we discovered how many tapes there were, and we were really concerned. I think the other thing that people don't realize is that there's a decay happening with any organic matter, right? And with tapes, most of the data related to how long they last and how they work is pretty antiquated.
It's pretty outdated.
And so I feel like I'm beginning to see, and Catherine can speak to this more than me, I feel like I'm seeing an acceleration in the degrading of assets.
It's really
and that may be related to storage and et cetera. But so there was
the budgets. Okay, so the budgets have gone down considerably in the music industry for all things. Everyone knows this. Hopefully they do. And so a part of that budget, proper storage is not cheap. Proper temperature storage for analog master tapes, and especially digital stuff, DATs, ADATs, forget it. Those things are degrading at a rate that is 10 times the rate of analog material. But, there's no budgets. And those budgets cut out when? 90s, mid-90s, early 2000s started to go down. I don't know about the years of that, but
like 2008, 2009.
Things are not, we had the 8 thing happen in it. So there's no money. It's like, okay, we have X amount of money to devote to this thing. And, it's like, cool, everything's on a hard drive. It's, let's just send the 1644 version. There's not a lot of
there were just
budget,
and I think
for storage. I think the storage issue it's become a pretty big problem.
Yeah, and I think the thing that is also tough is that.
But to answer your question really quick, we don't know because we've only had so
but
much
there's
time
definitely
get to certain things, and we're hoping that we'll be back, to get in.
Yeah.
I think so, to get into some more stuff that they wanna approach. And so, like, what do we know? We know,
we know there's stuff
we know
there.
about Funkadelic, and we know that there's more stuff around. So it is very possible that is there and it does exist, but it's also possible that it doesn't. So
I mean, and we'll find out. I have been told explicitly that there are a couple things that were sort of like Funkadelic adjacent, like solo records from various band members that did not come out that are present. We haven't necessarily seen them.
No idea what they are,
but we've been told there's some stuff there.
So there could be, again,
whether or not somebody decides they want to move that is again,
because obviously there's going to be, who knows who the rights go to, et cetera, et cetera. But we have been told there's some stuff there, and apparently there's some amazing multi-track stuff from Funkadelic sessions. That the other thing that was interesting to me was seeing how many people played on those records, specifically Dennis motherfucking Coffey. Like that dude
everywhere.
Oh my God. And it makes so much sense because at least for me,
those were fun. Those were fun tapes.
Yeah, for me at least, there are times listening to those Funkadelic records where I'm always like, well, I definitely hear Eddie Hazel, and I can hear the other guitar players that are consistent through the band. And then there are times when you're like, who the fuck is playing that other guitar? And I would say that in most cases it was Dennis fucking Coffey. And it's like, and it's just so cool because it's like that little bit of sleuthing where you're like, okay, that explains where this completely different feel that pops up on some of those records specifically. And so that's been a cool discovery.
That's amazing. Okay. So very keen to hear kind of what else is in those tapes. And I couldn't agree with you more on the Dennis Coffey. I hope the universe provides us another Eddie Hazel solo album.
Oh man, I don't know. Yeah, it would be cool. It would be very cool. And if there's specific stuff in that catalog that you have heard that supposedly exists, like, man, the same thing for you should do the same thing for me that I did, what I'm going to do for you with that AC/DC stuff, because I can get you some answers pretty quick.
Excellent.
We just have been looking for specific stuff. So if we have a specific thing to look for, we talk to Nick pretty regularly. I can say, hey, Nick, can you go in and look for this?
Yeah, apparently there was a third CJ & Co.'s album that was recorded but never released, and a few tracks got leaked here and there.
It might be on multis and it hasn't been mixed, which it's a pretty heavy possibility. There is a lot of multi-tapes in there that I had to just not look at them.
Yeah.
Don't look at them. Don't go over there. Don't look at them. Just pay attention to the things that we need to pull and find, and that's that.
Do you know if all the multis are there?
I don't know if all of them are there. I don't know if there's a lot of multis there, but we don't know if all of them are there. It's also like a thing where.
So, for example, if they want to do some sort of Giles Martin-esque remix of Maggot Brain or some of the big titles,
I believe the multis for a lot of the big records there. But it was like Catherine was saying, it was like a forest for the trees situation. It was just like.
Also, it's a brand new relationship with a catalog that somebody is, and I cannot stress this enough, that somebody is like, they're essentially opening up the door for you to go in and pick through their legacy.
Yeah.
And the amount of trust that needs to be established on both ends of that, especially with two maniac weirdos like Dave and I, is pretty heavy. So a lot of the times when you're in these situations, you're eyeballing a lot of you're like, whoa, there's a bunch of shit up there.
Someday I hope I come back and look at it.
You're not like, hey man, like, what are you gonna do with these multis? It was from the get go. The multi tracks. It was very clear to us that the multi tracks were not something that we were going to fuck with.
No.
When we got there, and so I think Dave and I, and again, it's like. You're in that situation every day, and it's high stress. We can have another podcast that's just about asset paranoia. I'll talk about that forever. But I think with the multis, we kind of made a concerted effort to just not really ask and just get in there and establish that relationship and make sure we were really focused on the masters staying in good condition, respect of the assets. respect to the collection, etc. So, but yes, there's tons of multis in there that I think we purposely just didn't look at.
Now, the tapes for Eye Against Eye, what were those from?
Eye Against Eye, we had to use probably it was a digital copy that had come from, I would assume. So that record, my understanding, was mixed on a 3M digital machine. And those machines are very, very hard to find and very problematic. Yeah. And so what I went through was I went through a bunch of different stuff, and I believe I found a DAT safety from the era that it was mixed. So it was I had an unmastered 1644 DAT digital transfer that probably came from the original tape. So the source integrity was pretty good. It was just, obviously lower resolution than you'd like, but I just, I did all the analog work and captured at a higher sampling rate. And so that one was pretty straight ahead. We were lucky. It was like on a lot of the Bad Brain stuff, digging and digging and digging, we were able to find some pretty well done earlier transfers that we wound up there. I made a lot of calls. I felt like I had a lot of trouble. I feel like those tapes are out there, and I feel like people have them personally, and I don't think it's anybody related to the band. I don't know if it's someone who used to be in management or someone who worked on the records, but I don't think those tapes have fallen off the face of the earth. No. But I think they're in private hands.
They may be in a building in Texas, I reckon. The one thing that
another thing. Yeah.
I talked to Spot before he passed. Yeah. And you can listen to the interview. It's online. And he talked about
one of the ones I've listened to. It's great.
Okay, good. Yeah, he talked about he still had a box of tapes, and this is right before I think he finally vanished. He started. I understand sending those out. Like I think the Meat Puppets got a bunch of tapes from him and others. So I think the distribution of those assets that he was holding on to kind of started getting out.
Yeah, I mean it's little things like, and when you're working on these records, like you have no idea, and especially as someone who I was fortunate enough to work on some, like especially with punk records, you didn't think anybody was going to be interested in this. And so a lot of those tapes, like I lived in Minneapolis for a long time. I still have a storage space there because when I moved to California, I was like, well, I have tapes that I felt were important that I hung on to that like clients never picked up. And so I hung on to them and I have them in a storage space, and I gotta deal with that or transfer them and find the folks who I can find. And it's amazing what is out there. And I just, again, it's that asset paranoia. I think people, like I on a project I'm working on that's not related to this, I probably spent the last 6 months doing legwork and engendering trust both by the artist and with the rights holders before that was able to be resolved in me having access to this, because and it's like I didn't get paid for any of that, and that's fine. That's fine. It's like in an ideal world it would be great, but to me what was more important was like I can see this. I know. Like you do all the sleuthing and you're pretty sure and you track it down, and then sometimes it just gets weirdly lucky. And I was like, we're so close. I just got to hang on and keep making people more comfortable and keep reminding them of why we're doing this and why we're doing this. And then hopefully, I think the more that we talk about this,
then you call me and you're like, you gotta come to LA.
Yeah. And it's like the more that I think we have conversations about this, I think hopefully people who were in bands or have the estate or have these assets and they aren't doing anything or don't know what to do with it, start thinking about that. And whatever decision they're going to make is going to be the right decision for them. But we have really, I feel like we're at a tipping point in cultural history where, we like these assets. It's sort of like that seed bank. I was comparing it to somebody last night.
We need to move them.
It's like the seed bank that's way up in the Arctic Circle, right? Like if there's some
and honestly, it's so wild. I mean, archivists that do this type of work, again, there are very few who really, because I'm not a mastering engineer, thank God. I married one, and everyone in my life is a mastering engineer, so I feel like I don't need to be one. But people who are just archivists, I mean, honestly, we just want to save the music. We literally just want to save the music. And obviously, we would like to eat and pay the electric bill as well. However, most of the time, our concern is like, please do not like let that thing die.
Yeah.
Like, just like, okay, we'll work out something that makes sense, but can you just allow us to save that, or at least get it into the digital realm, or even fucking make a tape, just copy it so that it doesn't get lost. I mean, that's the motivation. The motivation is to save these things
and share that. Like, I mean, the thing that's amazing about music to me is that, like, what is it about music? It is such an incredibly humanly resonant thing. It is like this, like, it's so, and I want people to be able to feel what I feel when I hear this stuff, and
right.
feel the way that however it's going to impact them, but to be in a position where that's really, like, you can really feel.
It seems kind of silly to try to convince somebody to do that.
Yeah.
In a way, but again, it's like what it is to me, or what it is to Dave, or, what it is to the consumer is going to be a lot different than what it is to that person that held onto that tape for so long.
I understand that 100%. And in a small way, that's my motivation as well, to try to get the stories and to try to get that information, because I don't know, 10 years from now, are people going to be interested in what Spot had to say? Or are people going to be, where are those stories at? So, yeah.
I mean, I guarantee they will. And I mean, how many of those people I don't like, the other things that I love other than music, like I love old motorcycles. I love them. I love old motorcycle racing. And I love I'm so glad that there was a period in time in which the stories of the people, like, who were involved in motorcycle racing and motorcycle design in the late 1970s and 1980s, when there was this massive, like, just unbelievable change, that I can go and I can pull that, and I can read interviews with them, and it's so incredibly insightful. And I think the stuff that you do is incredibly important. And like that you understand sort of this, like, the really complex relationship that these objects have with us. That's really important, and I don't know. That's,
I mean,
it's why I do what I do.
You can't argue that one piece of music is more important to the history of music than another,
or better, or worse.
Right. So,
like, that drives me crazy.
It's like, it's so like, okay, obviously working on Funkadelic, okay, it's a pretty big deal. But I also, for me, I have to approach, like, some tape that some dude found in his dad's attic. That was his dad's band in 1969 that, like, was tracked on some consumer, like, quarter track, whatever. And that's maybe more important to them.
We recently found some tapes of my grandparents from the early 70s singing their songs in Spanish. My mother hadn't heard them together for 50 years.
What's so lovely about my job is that I get these little insights into the history of people's lives, and then I get to present that to them. And oral history is so super important, and it's a really wild, cool, weird job to have. And there's more assets in the world than there are archivists to work on them. So what that lends itself to is this incredibly supportive, very small community of people who do this, who don't gatekeep, who aren't trying to get all, I mean, hopefully this is the case, but at least in my community, it's like, man, I made records for so long, and it's the amount of support and love that I'm getting from colleagues in my small community now surpasses the record making community by 1,000-fold, so it's just it's an interesting thing. And it's like, I think it's things that people don't really think about when they go buy records or reissues. And I love the idea of being able to get these types of stories out to people. Like, hey, there's like a lot of time and a lot of care that went into that thing that you're just flipping through in the record store, way more time and care than you could probably imagine, it's important. And of course, what Dave does, what we both do, I mean, we work a lot of hours that we don't get paid for. A lot of people do, but to make something that is just so subjective, it's wild.
I mean,
yeah,
what are we without culture?
Well, right.
We're
probably not worried about money.
But
you get my point. So yeah, this Westbound specifically is so meaningful to me in so many ways, and one of the biggest ones is just developing this like kind of wild, rad working relationship with Dave. Everybody hears really differently, and when you find somebody that you get along with that has the same nerd things you have, loves the same music you do, approaches things in the way that you do, and hears the same way that you do, it's like, oh shit, that's almost as good as working on funk. That's actually better, to be honest, for me than like the fact that it was Funkadelic or the fact that it was that Dixie Cups record or whatever. So the relationships for me that have been sort of, I don't know, pioneered during this process has been more life-changing than anything else.
And I feel the same way. I mean, it's we had lunch yesterday with Joel from Westbound and Andrew from Org and Jake, who's one of the people who works at Org, and it's just like, I got emotional seeing Joel.
Like these
and I've been in the same room with this guy like 5 times, but like you work.
Yeah, but he trusted us to do the shit.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like
and I mean, I think that I come from like a little bit of like, I'm always going to root for the underdog a little bit. So while I love that there's an incredible amount of attention paid to the Beatles records and to Pink Floyd records, and
you would certainly hope so.
I love that.
We'd have to be.
But to me, like what interests me is shine a light on some of the dustier parts of our history. And I think that, that's the stuff that's really important. And I think that's one of the things that's really interesting about Westbound, because Westbound had a great fucking run, but they kind of drifted out of people's, like, you cycle through popular fads enough that it's drifted a lot. Like some of the records, it's like this Donald Austin record that's just fantastic. And like that first, and like all this there's just so much great stuff that I hope that this Funkadelic being the thing that people are most familiar with,
it sort of propels the rest of this.
People into look at some of the other stuff. There's this.
The Counts record absolutely blew my mind.
Unbelievable. Yeah. And I had heard like
even Assemblage. What a wild record.
Assemblage is a really cool record too.
Oh yeah. And look, we can't say his name enough. Dennis Coffey.
Oh God, man! And it's so wild because like I hadn't ever really listened to that Dennis Coffey record, which was the first one we did, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God,
that cover of Fame!
This is the cover of Fame that Public Enemy samples.
Yeah, this.
I was like, oh my God, this is on Nation of Millions.
Yeah,
and you just like little stuff like that. It's magical. I feel incredibly fortunate.
Same.
You're doing God's work. So thank you both. Again, Dave, Catherine, thank you so much for the wealth of information. And I think we could probably just keep going and going. We'd love to have you back on another time. I'm going to point people to orgmusic.com. Get copies of Funkadelic. Hopefully very quickly there will be Maggot Brain and Free Your Mind and other titles. I think just getting on Org's mailing list is important too, or following them on socials. Again, thank you so much for all the work you do, all the information you share, and the passion that you have for this. I think we all benefit from it. And even though sometimes those hours are long, there are an army of people out there who absolutely enjoy what you do. So thanks again for everything.
Yeah, you bet.
Oh man, thank you, and right back at you. I mean, you're on the other side of the world from us, and you're getting up to do this with us, and I think like little things like you mentioned that, like I was trying to remember literally last week I was trying to remember where I had heard the interview with Spot, and it was your interview, and because I was having a conversation with him about him with another friend. And it's just like, it's that same thing. It's like the care and time you put into this is greatly appreciated too.
Oh, thank you. I wouldn't feel comfortable with myself if I wasn't doing it. I feel compelled to do it. This is something I always tell my kids, find something that you will lose sleep over. Yeah. You'll want to do more than sleep. And then that's kind of going to, find something, and money and things will find their way to you somehow, but you'll have a much better life if you do that.
Absolutely, man.
Wow, what a pair those are. That was quite the conversation. By the way, there's another hour extra available only to show patrons. Patreon.com/Vinyl Guide. Go over there, support the show, and you get all those extras. A whole nother hour with Dave and Catherine and I nerding out about Westbound and audio preservation. And it's in high resolution and comes with extra love. And that's it for this episode of The Vinyl Guide. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please share these episodes on your social media. Huge thanks to everyone who's leaving us positive reviews and, of course, sharing these episodes around. We certainly do appreciate that. And we'll be back shortly with a brand new episode. So until we talk next time, you all behave yourselves. And thanks again for listening to The Vinyl Guide podcast. Cheers.